So this one is sort of a part two to yesterday's video where I talked about the Denver Broncos' lack of depth on their edge rush unit and how I really feel like that could spell trouble for them down the line this season. Today I want to talk about another position that is right there along with the edge rush unit in my opinion as a position of concern for this team moving forward, and I feel like there is some things that the Denver Broncos can do to address this position, and I really feel like Broncos country is going to like some of the ideas that I have, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Today, the position that I am talking about is the interior defensive line. Those are the defensive ends and the defensive tackles, the nose tackles, the big boys up front, not the edge rushers like I talked about in yesterday's video. So we've got my favorite website, RLads, loaded up here, and I swear I'm not sponsored by them, but we've got RLads loaded up here, and we've got the Denver Broncos depth chart on defense, and I want to take a look at where I have some big concerns about the depth on our interior defensive line. To start off, to fill the void left by Draymond Jones, who departed via free agency to the Seattle Seahawks, we signed former Cardinals defensive end Zach Allen to fill that left defensive end spot. Now, he was signed to a 3-year, $46 million deal, and he's hoping to make a really massive impact here on our defensive line. He's familiar with Vance Joseph from their time together in Arizona, so his transition to this defensive scheme should be quite seamless. We also have DJ Jones to anchor down that nose tackle spot. He was signed as a free agent last season from the 49ers, and I feel like he was one of our better performing defensive linemen last season. So here's hoping he'll be able to continue that trend here in Vance Joseph's defensive scheme. The Broncos traditionally like to run with 3 defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen, 2 edge rushers, and 2 linebackers when they're in their base 3-4 defense. The Broncos have run a base 3-4 defense ever since 2015 when we transitioned from Jack Del Rio's defense to Wade Phillips' defense. And the base 3-4 has been continuous through the transition to Vance Joseph's defensive scheme, which has heavy influence from Wade Phillips, and then Vic Fangio's scheme as well, which is very different from the scheme that Vance Joseph and Wade Phillips have historically run, but it's also a base 3-4 defense. Right now, when the Broncos are in their base 3-4, their right defensive end, who's set to be playing alongside DJ Jones and next to another edge rusher, that's Matt Henningsen, who's penciled in to be the starter there. I also feel like you could pencil in Jonathan Harris into that role. Either way, I definitely have some concerns about Matt Henningsen or Jonathan Harris starting for the Denver Broncos in that position. Matt Henningsen was a 6th round rookie last season, and I thought that he did do some really good stuff, but at the same time, I don't feel like he did enough to justify him starting at that position this season, especially right out the gate. If he blows the team away in training camp once again, then maybe we could have the conversation about him being the full-time starter there, but otherwise, I don't know about that. Same goes for Jonathan Harris, who is now going to be here for his 3rd defensive staff for the Broncos, so clearly the team likes what they have in Jonathan Harris, but just like Matt Henningsen, I don't know if he's going to be a starter for this unit, at least an impactful starter if he does earn that role. Then we have Iomo Wazarike, who was a 4th round pick last year, although I feel like Matt Henningsen was the better player of our 2 rookie interior defensive linemen. I also really liked Wazarike coming out of college. So I really hope that Iomo Wazarike is able to translate some of that collegiate production to the NFL level. I just don't feel like he got a lot of opportunities last year, especially because he got outshined by Matt Henningsen. The only undrafted free agent that we brought in on the interior defensive line is at nose tackle, PJ Mustipher. He's going to be the 3rd string nose guy behind DJ Jones and Mike Purcell, who's still around and is still an impactful player for us, but I don't feel like Mike Purcell is going to solve our woes at defensive end. He's strictly a nose tackle. You could entertain maybe kicking DJ Jones over to defensive end, but I don't really like the prospect of doing that when we're in a 5-man front. I prefer DJ Jones as a nose tackle and having Mike Purcell in as more of a rotational guy when we're in a 5-man front. Behind them are a bunch of practice squad contenders. Tyler Lancaster is a veteran player, but he's trying to revive his career after being in retirement last year, so anything we get out of Tyler Lancaster is house money, quite frankly. I don't know what kind of impact guys like Elijah Garcia, Jordan Jackson, or Hagai Nabusi, or however you pronounce that, I'm so sorry, dude. I don't know how much those guys are going to make an impact this season. They may be practice squad candidates, if anything. The Broncos do have some options to address their issues on the interior defensive line. Now, their base defense is a 3-4 defense with a 5-man front. But as we all know, in the pass-happy era of the NFL, where offenses are running a lot of 11 personnel, which is 1 tight end, 1 running back, and 4 wide receivers, defenses are having to compensate by putting extra defensive backs on the field. This is where nickel personnel, or 5 defensive back personnel, or dime personnel, 6 defensive back personnel, that's where those kind of defensive groupings come into play. When our defense is in nickel, we're going to see a lot more 4-man fronts, 4-man on the up front of the defensive line. One thing I have heard quite a bit about the Broncos maybe wanting to do is kicking Frank Clark inside to an interior defensive lineman, especially when we're in 4-man fronts where he can put his hand in the dirt. Clark did some of that both in Seattle and in Kansas City, but more so in Seattle. However, that's not something we're going to be able to safely entertain until Baron Browning returns from his injury. We already talked about our concerns about our depth at edge rusher in yesterday's video. Because of this, I'm not comfortable giving too many snaps to Frank Clark on the interior defensive line until we have a healthy, consistent rotation on the edge and we can afford to remove Frank Clark from that equation, essentially. Another option, and I feel like the most likely one in a 4-man front, is Zach Allen and DJ Jones as our 2 interior guys. But what happens if one of those guys goes down? We're going to need somebody to compensate at that position. Either way you look at it, man, the Denver Broncos, in my opinion, need to add some sort of reinforcements on the interior defensive line. Be it through Frank Clark, once our edge rush unit gets healthy, of course, or be it through somebody else. And I feel like there's a candidate out there who fits this bill perfectly, and in my opinion, it just makes too much sense. The Broncos, in my opinion, really need to entertain bringing back Shelby Harris. Prior to getting to Denver in 2017, Shelby was struggling to find a home in the NFL. He bounced on and off the Raiders practice squad, then he had stints with the Jets and the Cowboys, but once he got to Denver, and honestly, he thrived in Vance Joseph's defensive scheme in 2017 and 2018, and once he got here, it felt like he found a home here in Denver. Shelby is beloved by almost everybody in Broncos country, myself included. He brings that nastiness, that dog mentality, quite frankly, that our defensive line desperately needs. And he's also a guy who comes in the clutch when we really need him. And he single-handedly has saved at least 3 games that I can remember off the top of my head. Obviously, in his first game as a Bronco, he blocked Younghoe Koo's field goal, which would have been a game-winning field goal against the Chargers, and he ended up saving that game for us. Then, in 2018, he intercepted a pass from Ben Roethlisberger in the end zone that would have given the Steelers a go-ahead score late in the fourth quarter. Then, in 2019, he batted down a pass from Derek Carr that would have given the Raiders a go-ahead 2-point conversion to win the game. Shelby Harris is a guy that will do whatever he has to do to give his team a win, and he was definitely salty when the Broncos traded him away as part of that Russell Wilson deal. He said it in his post-game interview after the Seahawks beat the Broncos in Week 1. Maybe you shouldn't have traded away your defensive lineman. Because of this, there is a chance that the bridge is burned between Shelby Harris and the Denver Broncos. But as far as I know, Shelby still lives in the city of Denver. So that could make the possibility of him returning to the Broncos a bit more intriguing. Also, getting to work with Vance Joseph again, with whom he thrived under, that could be a really interesting prospect for Shelby Harris. I also don't think it would break the Broncos' banks to bring Shelby Harris back. I don't think that he would cost more than like $4 or $5 million. And I feel like that would definitely be doable for the Broncos. Getting a quality starting defensive lineman for $4 to $5 million, I would absolutely take that, especially considering all the history that Shelby has with the Broncos. There's also been some reports that the Seattle Seahawks could be interested in bringing Shelby Harris back, as he was a big part of their playoff run last season. The Seahawks ended up having to release him because of salary cap issues, but at the same time, they have kept in contact with him, and I do feel like there is a chance Shelby could return to Seattle. If he doesn't go back to Seattle, though, I would definitely keep an eye on Shelby Harris as a potential late roster addition for the Denver Broncos on the defensive line, and I really feel like that would be a popular move amongst Broncos country. I know I would absolutely love it. So I'm curious, Broncos country, how do you guys feel about our depth on our interior defensive line going into training camp? And do you feel like you would be happy with us bringing back Shelby Harris? Drop those comments down below, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video, as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. I would really appreciate it, guys. As I always say, those are two free and easy ways to show your support. It helps tell the old YouTube algorithm to push us out and helps us get seen by more and more members of Broncos country just like you and me. And also, guys, be sure to follow me on the new Threads app at Gage Madrid NFL, same as my Twitter handle. And until next time, guys, this has been another episode of Denver Broncos Syndicate. I am your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.